Thank you all for coming on a very blustery November day. I was a little at sea with Ginny as to whether I should walk out like a wrestler or something like that, but we didn't have the music, so I'll just stand here as a stationary target. So thank you for coming here. This is walking and talking or writing dialogue that doesn't make you cringe. I thought it might be an interesting subject to broach because as viewers of TV, movies, streaming shows, whatever, we are subject probably to more dialogue and dialogue-based drama than any civilization in history. So we all have kind of the same reference point to talk about what's good and what's bad, and let's get started. First, I want to kind of get a sense of, I want to get a read of the room and get a sense of the background here in terms of how many people are just students of writing and dialogue, how many writers do we have in the room? Oh, awesome. Okay, great. All right. Later, you can tell me how to make money at it. How many people are interested, curious about writing, might want to dip their toes in it, that sort of thing? Okay, so split's kind of even both ways. Okay, a little bit about myself. As Ginny said, my name is Michael Grady, and my day job, my Bruce Wayne persona is I work in the marketing department over here, but I have been a freelance writer for about 35 years. I've written I've written 20 plays I'm proud of, and about 12 I'm not. I've written a lot of short stories. I wrote my first book this year, which was an interesting conversion from disciplines, and the thing that saved me was writing dialogue, and we'll get to that in a little bit, because it's a very useful skill even as you go over to short story writing or novel writing or something like that. It really is a secret weapon. I am a big advocate of writing as a discipline and as something for anyone to try, because it's one of the forces that has probably made the most difference in my life. It is something that teaches you a lot about yourself. It's something that allows you to surprise yourself a little bit. And if you haven't ever tried writing, I urge you to. You may not be a natural writer, you may just hate it, but even if that's the case, worst case scenario, you will learn about yourself, and it will broaden your horizons. And I recommend writing to anyone, and I recommend dialogue writing or writing using character voice to anyone who is an habitual writer, because it really levens and drives the story you're trying to tell. It gives it a richness and a complexity, but we'll get to that. Anyway, let's go. Let's see if the slides work, shall we? Okay, this is kind of an overview of what we're going to be looking at today. Basically what I touched on just now, how dialogue can help you tell a story, what it adds to something that might be just a singular viewpoint, short story traveling along narrative points, how it may broaden and deepen that. The best ways to write dialogue. Some writers have fixations about dialogue. I know a lot of good storytellers, people who can stand up more persuasively and more compellingly than me and tell their own story, but they're like, oh, I can't write in a character voice. I can't write multiple character dialogue. Yes, you can. We'll talk about that, how to do it, and how to position yourself to do it most effectively. And we're going to be talking about all the possibilities and the limitations of telling a story through other characters. And then at the back end, if you aren't sick of me and haven't thrown me out by this time, we're going to talk about ways to edit and shape dialogue so it tells your story most effectively. One of the things you find with dialogue is it's a lot of fun to write, but because it's fun to write, you will write a whole lot of it. And if you don't want, your one-act play to be 300,000 words long, for example, you're going to have to become a sharper editor. But that's a great price to pay. So we'll talk about that as well. All right. During the course of this, there is an audience participation component on this, and I want to warn you guys about all this because I hate audience participation as an audience member. So I'm going to have maybe Ginny and another volunteer read a couple of script samples through the microphone, but it's not going to be anything more invasive than that. It's not like the magician who pulls you up and then saws you in half or anything hideous like that. So, all right. Okay, dialogue is one of the storyteller's greatest tools. I find that it can help you start a story. It can help you broaden a story. It can help you tell your story to yourself. There are many points in writing short stories. This happens in almost every creative exercise I do. Short stories, plays, books, where through dialogue, a character tells me a bit of my story that I didn't know about. It brings a lot of surprises to the writer, and it makes the writing process less drudgery and more of discovery. And it's one of your greatest tools. And see, I got a little disclaimer here because it sounds like I'm pushing dialogue as some kind of prescription drug, on one of those things. So I wanted to put a little asterisk thing at the bottom. So ask your doctor if dialogue is right for you. Dialogue is also an introvert's delight because you get to be your own repertory company in the privacy of your office, right in front of your keyboard. If you're the type of person that has trouble speaking up at the DMV, you can go home and be every character in The Royal Hunt of the Sun or something like that. It's an introvert's delight. You get to write, you get to win every argument, which I really like personally. That's really a benefit. So it's a joy to experiment with. And now let's go to someone else's dialogue as an example of what we're talking about. And this is where I'll need Ginny and another volunteer. Who do we got here? Who's feeling brave? No, thank you very much. No, you can do it from there. I'm going to project this on the screen, and I'll set this up a little bit. This is a snatch of dialogue. I can only do really small snatches of dialogue from a play called Other People's Money. And it's a late 80s play. It's an excellent play by Jerry Sterner about venture capitalists and how they were going through and breaking up companies and selling them off for parts during the 80s. And this is an encounter, what we are going to read. You're both going to be guys, but I appreciate your ability to stretch. Let's have you be Garfinkel, the first one to speak, and his words are going to be in gold. And let's have you be Cole. Okay? And read whenever you're ready.
What can I do for you? I'm really not here on business. My wife and I came down to spend the evening with Bill Jr. He's attending Columbia. Got 2 more after him. Great. Claire's out shopping now. It's always a treat to come in this city.
What'd you come here for? To give me your biography?
I didn't know I was boring you.
Well, now you know.
I'll get to the point. I see the latest 13D. You hold just over 400 shares. That's 10%. The filings say they were for investment purposes only. What does that mean?
Means I bought them to make money.
How much more do you intend on buying?
That's none of your business.
Can we speak frankly?
No, lie to me. Tell me how thrilled you are to know me. Tell me how gorgeous I am.
You don't want to speak frankly?
I always speak frankly. I don't like people who say, can we speak frankly? Means they're bullshitting me the rest of the time.
I'm sorry, I don't use that phrase anymore.
What do you want?
2 years. I want 2 years.
Okay, Thank you very much. Quick round of applause for our participants here. This is a wonderful play, and it's available through Samuel French. And if you get a chance to read it, because it's one of the plays that talks so articulately about the dynamics of business. It's very much a piece of its time, but it's a wonderful, wonderful story. And you can get a sense of how good it is from how the characters are defined just from their speech. My favorite point is where Coles does the very passive aggressive, I didn't know I was boring you, and leaves space for an apology, which anyone from New England would do. And the other guy goes, now you know. You get a sense of these people, right? You get a sense of different characters, different agendas, different energies. And that is so much more vital than, imagine this as a piece of prose. Imagine this as a short story, okay? It would be something along the lines of Coles goes in to visit Garfinkel. Garfinkel is rude and throws him out. It doesn't go well. And there's so much more complexity and dynamics. You feel you know these guys so much better because dialogue isn't just the lines people are throwing at each other. Dialogue is the behavior. It's governed by behavior. It tells you where a person's purpose is. It tells you a lot about their speech, their style, their word choice. It gives you a depth of character that you can then use as an author to innovate as you move along down your story. It is the difference. I found this was a really good quote. Dialogue versus prose, in many cases, is a difference between understanding a story and eavesdropping on it. And the second part is much more dramatic. It's a little, as a narrative, it makes telling the narrative a little more indirect and puts more pressure on you as a narrator, but it grabs your audience. It holds your audience in the moment. And that's one of the things that's wonderful about that. You always want to watch people behave. So let me go back and be the drug pitchman again and go, what can dialogue do for you? And this is just a quick breakdown. Dialogue, and I've learned this as a playwright, because dialogue will move your story along at warp speed because you're just skipping all the details and going right to the behavior. And it's a great way of capturing the breadth of a story without getting bogged down in any of the details. If you're outlining a story, if you're planning a story, sometimes it's better just to hash through the dialogue or the lines you hear in your head as you're outlining it, because it will give you a basic shape, and then you can go back and fill in you can kind of spackle prose in between the good parts of speech. We'll be doing that a little later, about 10 slides down, so hang on there. Dialogue will also, it'll improve your storytelling style. It will establish a style for you, and it helps you set up your conflict. Who, referring back to the other people's money section, who doesn't see where that story is going? Who doesn't see that those two people are going to come to a profound conflict over that company, right? And that's said without a word of narration, just in the behavior of the characters. Okay, so I think I've sold you on dialogue is a good thing. All right, so how do you start doing it? You start really by dealing with the elephant in the room. I referred to this earlier. A lot of folks think, oh, I can't write dialogue. Good writers, I've heard good writers tell me, you know, I'd like to write plays, but I just can't write dialogue, or I'd like to get out of the narrative voice, but I can't write dialogue. Everybody in this room, and I haven't met most of you, is qualified to write dialogue. You know why? Do you speak in your course of life? Yes, you do, right? And anyone who speaks aloud is qualified to write dialogue. If you have ever if you have ever sat behind the steering wheel of a car and answered the question, do you know why I pulled you over? You've written dialogue. If you've ever, made your case for a 5% raise or something from a boss, if you've ever told off an ex or walked away from an ex knowing what you should have said to that ex, you have written dialogue. Everybody does it. The best dialogue has the naturalistic elements of speech to it. And the trick is getting past that initial self-consciousness and letting it roll with the ease of speech, right? You get yourself in a position to write, you know what you want to write, and it should just flow. And here's where dialogue has it all over real life conversation. You can go back and edit dialogue, right? If there's a stretch where you were not so articulate or you couldn't find the right word or you go down a rabbit hole, you can just pull that sucker back in a script and write it better. And that's a gratifying thing for some of us converted introverts. All right, so you just get started. And here's how you get started. Here's how I do it personally. You may vary the formula. But the best dialogue to me is not written by you. What you do as a writer is you lay the field, prepare the ground. You set up a situation, right? Two people in a room. Doesn't even have to be a room. Two people in a forest. I don't care. Two or more people in a situation where each is trying to pursue a purpose. Get one of them to talk. And the others will naturally respond to them. And it isn't more complicated than that. If you do your homework, if you know where your story wants to go, your narrative arc, right? And you have a good sense of your characters in terms of who they are, what they want, where they want to go, then it really is a matter of staring at the screen or staring at a blank page and just letting them talk. Start with a situation that seems ripe with possibility and let the people talk to them. My book that I'll show you in a little bit, Breaking Ball, came from this situation. And I didn't know there was a book attached to it. I just thought this was an interesting situation. In my mind, I had a professional ball player walking to his car in the security lot behind a stadium after a game. It's the middle of the night, and from behind the locked fence out on the street, a young person who is apparently injured calls to him for help. And he has a choice about buzzing this kid in a high crime area or just going home to watch Sports Center, which is all he really wants to do. And I just started with, please help me. And then the behavior goes from there. This is something I learned. It almost sounds lazy. It's so easy once you get in position on it. This is something I learned from August Wilson, whom I was fortunate enough to have a few workshops with eons ago, right? But people were asking him, how do you write characters? For those of you who don't know, Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, Fences, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, very good guy. He was asked, how do you write dialogue from one of these people who thinks you have to craft and chisel every word? And he said something that was very liberating to me. He said, I know my characters, I put them in a situation, and then I wait and I listen for them, and they start talking to me. And that's the best thing. Now, normally you're not going to see a circumstance where somebody is going to encourage you to hear voices in your head. But in this circumstance, it's a wonderful thing because It's basically your subconscious bubbling up as different characters and then interacting, and everybody can do it. It's just a matter of giving yourself permission to. All right. All right. So that's the formula. When you want to write dialogue, if you're a playwright writing a scene or a screenwriter, or if you're a novelist or a short story writer, same basic formula. It works across all those genres. Set up the situation. Okay, I'm writing this scene. You have in the back of your head roughly what you want to happen. You have a rough understanding of what the characters want and how they may conflict with each other. So just go, speak in their voice. Again, you get 1,000 mulligans when you're writing dialogue. You can go back 1,000 times till you get it right. So if you miss a little or you miss a lot, you can start over, but you'll be amazed. And the best way to do it is get an idea, start hearing those voices, follow those voices until the idea runs out, and then look at what you have, right? I'm sorry, one thing, if this is not, speaking of dialogue, this is not supposed to be a monologue unless you wish it so. So if there's any point where you have a question, please don't stand on ceremony, just raise your hand and I'll talk. Should have said that at the start, but what the heck. All right, here's some basic rules for the road. When you're writing dialogue, when you're first drafting dialogue, right, your enemy is self-judgment and self-consciousness. So start writing, keep going, follow the flow of the idea, follow the logic of the speech, follow each character or what they want and how they're expressing their feelings, and don't stop to be writerly about it. Don't stop to like make that sentence just perfect, or don't stop to, if a part of it is terrible, leave it in the rearview mirror. Just keep going and you'll be surprised what's on the end there. You don't want to force anything. You don't want to say, you don't want to consciously drop something on characters who are interacting very well in your mind. You want to let them embrace things and roll things as they go. Frequently what happens when I'm doing this is I'm very orderly and type A about outlines and plannings and things. And my characters will run right ahead of me on the outline. I'm writing scene 4 and they'll mention some development that I wasn't planning until scene 6 or whatever. That's great. That's terrific. Just roll with it. Roll with it in the moment, then don't stop to see what you got till the end. Okay. Anytime, if a character does something nonverbal, like a punch, a kiss, a stare, a prolonged silence, those are great because dialogue isn't always chatter, 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 chatter. It's also the things you choose not to say, the roundabout things you choose to say, the ironic or partially said thing. So any dynamic like that is another color on the palette, and that is wonderful. And as I said before, any surprises pop up, that's gold. That's the stuff that makes the experience of writing just wonderful. You may not keep it, but roll with it. It's a transcribed improv exercise. Think of it that way. All right. We are going to need 2 more volunteers to read a section of Night Mother. So, Ginny, can we use you? Who else is feeling brave? Can you match your previous success? Because you set the bar pretty high the first time. Thanks for. No, I'm putting you to work. You're helping me out. Okay, this is a Pulitzer Prize winning play by Marsha Norman called Night Mother. And this is a discussion between Jesse and Mama. Why don't you do Jesse? Why don't you do Mama? And we'll talk about it at the end.
You mean to tell me I had fits all the time as a kid and you just told me I fell down or something? And it wasn't until I had a fit with Cecil was looking that anybody bothered to find out what was the matter with me?
Wasn't all the time, Jesse. They changed when you started school, more like your daddy's. Oh, that was a swell time, sitting there with the two of you, turning on and off like light bulbs.
How many fits did I have?
You never hurt yourself. I never let you out of my sight. I caught you every time.
But you didn't tell anybody. You were ashamed.
I didn't want anybody to know, least of all you.
Least of all me? Oh, right. That's why that was mine to know, Mama, not yours. Did Daddy know?
He thought you held out a lot. That's what he thought. You were careless, or maybe he thought I beat you. I don't know what he thought. He didn't think about it.
Because you didn't tell him.
If I told him about you, I'd have to tell him about him.
I don't like this. I don't like this one bit.
Okay, great. One more round of applause for our stalwart repertory company here. Thank you very much. This is a brilliant play. Again, I'm pitching other people's plays. This is a brilliant play by Marcia Norman from 1983, I believe. And it is entirely a conversation. Who's read this? Who is it? Anyone read this? You have, so you know. It's entirely a conversation between an adult woman with an unhappy life and the mother she cares for. On the night, the woman says, Jesse says, I want to end my life. And it's an hour and a half of very compelling conversation of Jesse going about the business of this while her mother is trying to stop her. And I don't know Marcia Norman personally, but I'm betting she did a lot of the kind of conversational freestyling we were talking about earlier, because surprises like this crop up in the script. All of a sudden, we're in the backstory of this childhood of Jesse's, and Jesse, who has been laboring with seizures during her adult life, finds out in this sideways way, in this kind of by the way, that those seizures go back to birth, and she had two parents who did nothing about it. And that's a thunderous bit of exposition in context. That's why I want you to read the whole play. But it's a thunderous bit of exposition because it tells you a lot about what she had to deal with and the type of person the mother was and the type of relationship they had. It informs you so much on character, and it's wonderful. And it's done totally in dialogue, but it's very well shaped dialogue. It's the type of wonderful writing where it's a long conversation, but it's crafted down corridors so it looks seamless, but it hits so many plot points. And that's the best kind of dialogue writing. Okay, here's a quiz. Can you create a play just by writing dialogue? A, not if it's a play about mimes. B, yes, but the dance numbers will stink. C, yes, but you'll have a lot of editing and shaping to do. D, yes, or E, C and D, and probably B. This is why they don't let me teach anymore, is because I do multiple choice questions like this. This is why the restraining order happened. The answer is actually E. You can write a play just totally based on dialogue. As a matter of fact, that's an excellent way to start a play from zero. If you have a story you want to tell, sometimes the easiest way, well, if you don't have a story you want to tell, sometimes the easiest way is just to sit down with a blank sheet and put down a word of dialogue, write somebody saying something, write somebody else responding to it, and see where it takes you. That's a great way of starting from scratch. And I know a lot of playwrights that start that way. I've talked to many playwrights who are like, I'm very excited about this piece. I'm like 3 scenes in, and I'm like, wow, what's it about? What happens? And they're like, I'm not completely sure yet. You know, because your characters are informing you as you go along. The downside of doing that is you will wind up with a lot of extra text, and you have to edit that. And editing dialogue can be kind of painful. One, because you're sorting through a lot of words, but the upside of that is you have great choices, great selections to choose from. And what you want to do is break it down by scene and go to the core of the dialogue, the discussions, the arguments, the interactions that follow the story you want to tell, and throw away the rest. And chances are you'll throw away some very good conversations, but you have to be very disciplined as an editor doing that. Okay. It's important when you're working this is really important in books, I found. But also very important in dialogue-driven matters like plays and screenplays, where you know what dialogue can't do, what the limits of it are. And here it is. It can't tell your whole story. A friend of mine said this, and it's true. A play that is wholly about dialogue is really kind of a long episode of The View, because you don't have an event. Okay, Hamlet kills his uncle, right? Willy Loman drives off and ends his own life. I'm only thinking of depressing plays for some reason. In every story, every good story, right? Tale of Two Cities, okay? The French Revolution, something happens. And dialogue can frame it and lead you up to that, but there has to be action. There has to be actual physical deeds. Something has to change in a story. So you don't want to try to pull that off with just a long conversation. There can be revelations in the conversation, but the revelations have to have some effect on changing the given circumstances of the story. Dialogue can't give you those little nuances that set the scene, like the feel of the time period, the vibe, the unspoken vibe you might be getting off of someone. Dialogue is about the moment, and larger atmospheric things or subtleties are things that you want the author to observe, you want a stage manager to present in the visual that they wrap the story in. You don't want to do that through dialogue, you know, or you wind up with wooden dialogue like, gee, this house is creepy. Or I remember when we lived in Kansas 3 years ago, and you get this horrible dialogue that humans would not actually say. Inner monologues, what's going on in your character's head. This is why it's sometimes very hard to translate mysteries from prose to stage or screenplays. Is a good mystery lets you inside the detective's head, and sometimes the murderer's head, right? And you can move seamlessly. Good books do this all the time, from what someone is saying to what someone is thinking to someone's flashback and unspoken memory. It moves between the immediate and the unspoken very fluidly. And a lot of times you need that context to tell your story with any kind of efficacy. So you can't go inside. You don't want to do that with dialogue. Or you also wind up with bad dialogue, like people telling you, I'm a happy person normally, or people describing other people's behavior. I hate that in stories where it's like, Joanne is such a conundrum. that's bad writing. If you hear that don't do that. That's behavior you want to observe as an audience member. You don't want to put that in somebody's mouth.
I just have a quick question about dialogue for one-person shows.
Mm-hmm.
Do you follow the same rules that you're giving us if it's like a one-person?
That's a
show?
really good question.
Yeah.
And the answer is no, because a one-person show has a skewed premise. I don't want to say skewed. It operates off a different premise. Whereas I'm the only character, or at least I'm the only actor, right? And I'm sharing everything with the audience. So in a way, a one-person show is a dialogue with the audience, and the audience is being the compassionate listener, right? And that's a great question, because then the rules change a little bit. If you're one person on stage, you can be a little more forthcoming about what's inside you, because it's kind of a rules of the game thing. And there can be some really effective one-person shows that employ that really well. But in terms of multiple person exchanges, you want to keep it believable, and you want the people, you want to observe how they behave instead of having someone tell you who they are.
But in books that are not plays,
Mm-hmm.
there is interior dialogue.
Right. Yeah.
I just made a point. I just said in things that are not a play,
Right.
there is interior dialogue,
Oh, yes.
which you use like face print. I use italics to show that,
Yeah.
because characters in a novel think inside their head all the time.
Absolutely. And I think that's where I think working in a novel is actually, that's very good observation. That's why I think working in a novel is a much easier medium from moving in and out of, overt interaction with another person to internal monologue. And that gives the reader, the audience, a context, because they know everything that's going on in the behavior out here and in the mechanics back here. So yeah, it's something that novels and books and short stories actually have a greater facility to do. What do we got? See, I'm trying to read off that, but I don't have my glasses. So I'm constantly turning my back on you, I'm sorry. Okay, we've exhausted this slide. Okay, here we are. Now we're on kind of to your point, what you were talking about. The difference between writing dialogue in a dialogue favoring context like screenplays or plays and stories, prose, is that you have an extra tool in terms of your power as a narrator, right? So you can go to the inner place of each, you can go right to a inner character's soul. Sometimes you use italics, sometimes you don't. I used a lot of italics on this book coming up. But Hamlet had the soliloquies, and that goes more to the genre Ginny was talking about the one-person show thing, because it sets, Richard III did that too, where we're going to set up something, we're going to set up a construct where you're not just the audience, you're my confidant. So I can turn to you and say, now is the winter of your discontent, or something like that. I can say to be or not to be. And maybe in a real world situation, this is just the ruminations of my mind, but in the construct of this event, I'm using you as my conscience and confessor, right? They do that in the play version of Amadeus, they do that brilliantly, because Salieri tells the whole story to the audience because he's hallucinating and he's near death, and he casts the audience as ghosts of the future, and so they can be his confessor. Uh-oh, I'm getting waved at. Okay. Oh, okay. I thought this was be taller. I'm gonna be this. I'm trying to stay on this side of the line because it's like the splash zone in SeaWorld you don't want to get to, and then my head gets cut off. But that's an excellent observation. But one of the things I found or going to writing books and short stories is it's great to have that extra bit of that extra tool, that extra brush, because you can gently direct your dialogue and then get out of the way. And then at places where you want to have someone's extended inner monologue, you got that too. This is a novel I wrote this year called Breaking Ball. And what it is basically, it's a 3-person story about a fading baseball player and a juvenile delinquent he kind of adopts because he thinks the delinquent is his good luck charm. Unfortunately, the good luck charm has a mother who is working two jobs and doesn't approve of the arrangement. This is a part from the middle of the book where Rita, the mother, and Chase, the pitcher, get together to discuss Jake, her son. And I've color-coded this. The yellow dialogue is Rita. The green stuff is Chase, the ball player. And the white stuff is what we were talking about, the narrative voice stuff that I put in to just kind of point the conversation in the right direction. I'll give you a second to read that. And what I'm doing here with the white text is really just bringing in small behaviors to underscore the story as it's evolving through the dialogue. And the proportion of this varies depending on the situation and the writer and everything else. But I got to tell you, this is my first book, and it's a hell of a lot of fun because all of a sudden you have a new tool that you haven't been able to play with before. And where you want to get your viewpoint in, where you want to speak directly to the theme of your story, you can sneak that in there. You know, where you want to get out of the way and let the character's behavior paint that picture, you just do that and drop in as little as you possibly can to frame it. And this has been a wonderful process for me and a learning process for me. I don't think you ever stop learning your own writing style. That's one of the cool things about it, is you can go back to it for your millionth time, you know, and it's gonna, Barbara Kingsolver, Oliver, Stephen King, I bet they learn something new about writing every time they sit down to the keyboard, because there's always a tweak in the style that offers up more opportunities. So that's that. A word about editing now. We talked a little bit about it. Here's a couple of ways to field test the dialogue you write to make sure it's not crap. I have many times, especially writing late at night, been typing away and like, has this happened to you where you're like, this is genius? And then the next day you're like, oh my God, was I drinking? You know, sometimes in the heat of the moment, you'll write something that just seems great to you, but you don't have the perspective to really judge it fairly. When you're writing dialogue, it's always good to read it back to yourself aloud after you've written it, and then maybe an hour or a day afterwards too. That helps you get away from clunky lines that no human would speak. As a playwright, I often found that actors would call me out on bad dialogue because they don't want to have to say it. They don't want to have to say, you know, I remember when you came over from the old country. You know, there's always one character, especially in those old plays. I used to call him Johnny Exposition, that comes in and has a throwaway role. And it's like, you know, here we are from the Ozarks where our get rich plan didn't succeed, you know, and you're like, what human says that? So you want to kind of test your dialogue by hearing it aloud and checking to see if any normal human would say these things, and get somebody else to, if you can, to get another critical eye on it. And then in terms of paring down dialogue, it goes back to what we talked about a few slides ago, which is write your story, break it down by scene, and then know what you want to accomplish in that scene in terms of what's the next part of the story. Does it get you to the next part of the story? One of the things I always do, and I found this is a great tip, if you're writing a book or a play, if you're in the middle of it, you write a paragraph on what has just happened, and then you write a paragraph on what has got to happen immediately after this section is over. And that will give you a clear beginning and end point to your narrative. Then you look at your dialogue and go, does this serve the narrative? Does this advance the story toward that end point? If the answer is no, it's got to go, or at least it's got to be severely cut down. And I have cut a lot of really good, quippy, clever, Noel Coward-like dialogue because it's good in and of itself, but it doesn't serve the story. And if you have too many of those side roads on your narrative, you wind up with something that isn't worth the heft for the reader or the audience. They're like, wow, it's kind of an interesting story, but why did we have to take 3.5 hours to get there? You know, so you have to be, the whole kill your darlings thing applies here. You have to be merciless in terms of what will actually serve the overall story you're trying to tell. And that's about it for me. This is my walk away. All of this we're talking about is a lot of fun. And yes?
I just was going to add, I notice when people are talking to each other, that they don't listen.
Yes.
And so I recently wrote a scene where one person's talking and then the other person just interrupts and does their thing, and then the first person goes back to where they were, and neither one of them connect. Yeah.
That's, you know, that's at the same time, that's one, a bad commentary on modern society, and two, something that's just bursting with dramatic potential, right?
Yeah.
You know, when you have dialogue where people, Tennessee Williams stuff is often like this, where people imperfectly listen, or they, what do the communication folks call it? Selectively listen, where you're listening, you're telling me your story, but I'm listening for certain things that affirm my opinion of you. And
I'm listening for a place to butt in.
Oh yeah, yes, and that frequently happens, right? I mean, how many political shows have we watched? And you can see the people, they're like, you know, they're like little guppies or something, you know, on the people don't listen nearly as well. And the ones that do have tremendous dramatic potential in this context, but you're right. And often they don't even speak complete sentences. you know, David Mamet has, you know, got this down to the point where it's almost abstract art, where someone will say 3 words, oh yeah, and you, and also, and then we go over and did the, oh yeah, we did that. And it's this weird kind of patois that ultimately makes sense. But as someone who's done some of his stuff, it's a nightmare to memorize. But you're absolutely right on the way people do and don't listen these days.